Hey, welcome everybody. This is fantastic. I have been gone for 2 weeks, missed 2 Fridays in a row with you and with James. And James has some fantastic guests with Andy Woods and Don Stewart. And I'm back. And James, this is great to be here with you today. And everything has been moving along as fast as it ever was before I left. In fact, things are continuing to heat up. So think about this, James. You ready?
Yes, sir.
Hurricanes. We got hurricanes, famines, pestilences, plural. There's wars and rumors of wars, which, by the way, are escalating at an incredible rate between some of the things that China is doing, what's going on with the U.S. If we have time, we'll get into that. We have riots. We have lawlessness. The riots are not slowing down. They're only increasing. But I've heard that this has upset the Biden camp. So now that they're worried that the riots might take away votes from Joe Biden, that, hey, the Democrats might have to get involved and find a way to calm down the riots. So you're looking at this going, this is nuts. We have lawlessness abounding. The love of many has grown cold. James, what do you have to say about all of these things?
Well, the bus has passed on the Democratic National Committee because, and the DCCC, I'll leave that be. Well, I guess we could talk about that at another time. Let me just simply say this, all this mess that you guys see here in the background, the boxes and all this stuff, so sorry, we're in the process of remodeling my office, and the last few days has been the days where everything is barfed all over the place. So Tom's got his beautiful, clean studio, and I don't. So anyway, I just want to apologize for that. Want to let you know what's going on. But yeah, it's interesting. You know, that ship has actually sailed. It's unique. The Democrats had a perfect opportunity, absolutely perfect opportunity to address that issue during their convention, and they didn't, which of course is no surprise. I think they want to see it happen. The whole idea behind what we're seeing with the wars, the rumors of wars, all the other things that are happening, the lawlessness, the riots, the hurricanes, everything that's going on. What's really interesting to me isn't necessarily the fact that they're happening. It's the frequency by which they're beginning to happen a little bit more. But even more interesting than that is to see how widely accepted the lawlessness appears to be right now. I mean, it's extraordinary. Now, I will say this. I don't think it's widely accepted by the general population of the United States of America. I think that the general population of the United States of America is getting very, very sick of it all. But nonetheless, it's amazing how it's just being allowed to continue on. It's amazing how that is a very unpopular way of looking at this. And it absolutely blows my mind. It's crazy how that kind of thing is happening. So anyway, interestingly enough,
is that Charlie Kirk?
I'm so sorry,
Charlie
man.
Kirk calling you?
Dude.
Hey, no, keep going. Listen, keep going. So Charlie Kirk is going to be your church this Sunday morning. Go ahead and take that. I'll keep talking. And he's going to be with us Sunday afternoon on Hope for Our Times YouTube channel and also on my Facebook. And we'll be live at the 412 Church in San Jacinto. However, at the 412 Church, we had to have tickets. The tickets were free. There wasn't enough room to be able to hold all the people who are going to want to come. So that event sold out, but everybody can watch that online, and that's going to be absolutely fantastic. So that's going to be, again, Hope for Our Times, this YouTube channel, also on my Facebook. Be sure that you watch it, share it with friends. That'll be Charlie Kirk this week. James, we've been talking about the lawlessness that's taking place. We are seeing it. It seems like people really don't seem to care, or they've just accepted it. I'm reading some notes that people are putting on social media. People that were in the past, I would say conservative, maybe even churchgoers, and they seem to be thinking all of the lawlessness is absolutely justified. And I'm thinking, man, this is just unbelievable to watch what has happened. But the shift in people's hearts and the shift in people's minds. James, I'm going to shift gears here for a second because I listed a whole bunch of things from the hurricanes and the one that's just devastated Louisiana, famines and pestilences and so forth. I mentioned immorality. I want you to comment on this. This article says progressive predator protection. Last week in California, The Assembly Appropriations Committee voted to pass Senate Bill 145 by Scott Wiener, a San Francisco Democrat. Katie Grimes of the California Globe notes, citing the analysis of SB 145, this bill states non-forcible sodomy, oral copulation, and sexual penetration with a minor do not require mandatory sex offender registration unless there's a 10-year gap between the minor and the other person. And as she reported, SB 145, listen to this. This is a real clincher. SB 145 would allow a sex offender who lures a minor with the intent to commit a felony sex act the ability to escape registering as a sex offender as long as the offender is within 10 years age of the minor. And so the way I understand this is if there's a minor 14 years old and someone that's 23 years old that's less than 10 years, they can force that 14-year-old to have sex and won't have to register as a sex offender. I look at this, James, and I think immorality and where we've gone. Romans chapter 1 says that God will give them up to their vile passions, give them up to uncleanness. And also, then he says, I will give them over to debased mind. And then God says this at the end of Romans chapter 1, not only will I judge those who practice such things, but I will judge them who approve of those. And I look at that, and there's people who vote and approve of this type of thing from their political leaders. And this stuff coming, we read about sex education in schools to kindergartners, that things are just appalling. James, what do you have to say about these things?
I just think it's absolutely reprehensible. I mean, look, and this is the problem. Folks, we need to listen to this. Okay, look, there's a real danger in the place that we're in right now as we're getting closer and closer and closer and closer to the soon return of Christ. Look, we know that Christ's coming is around the corner. We know that he could come at any moment. Literally, he could come before you finish watching this video. Realistically, we know that that can happen. But the greatest danger that happens in the mind of a believer when we say Jesus is coming at any moment and the world is going to go to hell anyway and everything is going to blow up is we tend to use that as a license to be quiet about these things and not actually speak up, when in reality, I believe it's the heart of God for us to fight concerning these issues. I think it's in the mind and in the heart of God for us to be the type of people who will speak up when these things happen, whether they be a micro tyranny or a macro tyranny. These are the types of things that we need to speak up with, because here's the problem. Let me tell you where this is going to go, Tom. This starts off at what they call the most palatable piece that they can throw in society's throat. Okay, so they're going to say, okay, well, you know what? We're still going to criminally prosecute him for the sin of rape, but what we're not going to do is we're not going to require him to be a registrant because we don't want to ruin his future, blah, 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 blah. That's where it starts. And when the Christians don't speak up, as soon as the Christians choose to be quiet about the whole thing, when no one's speaking, society's not speaking, nobody's, fighting concerning these things, and they say, okay, well, you know what? We gave them that, so let's go take some more. They allowed us to do this. We'll go ahead and take some more. And then pretty soon we're going to say, well, you know what? For the last 15 years, this has been an issue that we have had before us where, we've said that, even the American Psychological Association says, hey, there is such a thing as consensual sex in a minor or someone of tender age with somebody who's an adult. We accepted that. Nobody fought against that. Nobody spoke against it. Actually, I spoke against it. I fought against it, but nobody spoke against it or fought against it. I know you did too, Tom. But the problem is that, when the whole conglomerate of believers just sit down and leave it alone, then the greater and greater and greater and greater tyrannies take place. Mark my words, Tom, if this gets accepted, if this is allowed to get passed in the law pretty soon, they're going to say the sexual act that takes place, whether or not it is deemed as forcible, is still going to be a consensual act, and they're not going they're going to make it to where it's going to be so difficult to criminally prosecute anybody who does that kind of a thing that it's just going to, it's just lawlessness is going to abound in ways that is so crazy we never even thought. It's going to go beyond the typical rioting in the streets. It's going to go beyond the typical nonsense that we're seeing right now. It's going to be that all of these things are legal and it's no big deal. I mean, give me a break, Tom. If we are okay as Christians, if we're not speaking loud enough about these people who are taking babies that are just born and after 5 minutes making a decision that they are a fetus, letting them suffocate to death, letting them flail basically and suffocate, and then in some cases even executing them. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah.
This is infanticide. I mean, what are we talking about? And that's what happens. You give them a little, they take a lot. We've been talking about this with the church closures. Same kind of a situation. We let them have a few weeks. Guess what? They want to take a few more. You let them have a few more. Guess what? Now they want to start taking your liberties.
Yeah. So you look at this. So this whole church closure thing started back in March. You only have to close for 2 weeks. Here we are 6 months into these quarantines and all these rules and regulations. You look at this, thinking of the church closures, thinking of what you just mentioned about abortion and afterbirth abortion, as you commented, and then this perverted sex laws coming out of California. I believe everything's coming that way. So I look at the church, James, and I think, okay, the church said very little about abortion for a long, still don't. You do, I do, others do, as we know. But by and large, most churches, most pastors won't even touch it because they're afraid of offending somebody. They won't talk about these things that are just bad news. And then you look at the churches that aren't even willing to open. And when is the church ever going to stand up? Are they ever going to stand up against these sex laws? I say no, they're not. And as I look at it, I say, how many churches, you pastor churches open, I pastor churches open, Jack Hibbs, we know some others also, obviously John MacArthur, and then you've been involved with Jeff down at Calvary Chapel of Downey, who's been dealing with LA County. I'm thankful I am not in LA County. You're in LA County. Jeff is in LA County. John MacArthur's in LA County. You got those struggles. So pastors aren't even standing up to go to church or to have church. They definitely aren't standing up against these perverted laws. And then you look at abortion. They haven't stood up against abortion, and they still aren't. In fact, James, I remember you probably about a month or two ago, you had commented on abortion and how many black children, how many black babies are aborted, and you got blasted by a couple of pastors over mentioning that as if that was more important than the riots or whatever it was. And I look at this, I go, this is just the thinking that is going on is just boggling to my mind. Yet professing to be wise, Romans chapter 1 says, I'll prove them to be fools. And you look at this stuff and you go, it's just absolutely terrible what's happening.
Yeah, and I'm still continuing to get blasted by pastors over that. Why? Because they're cowards. They spend as much time standing up, if not more, standing up for the 1619 Project and Black Lives Matter and all of that other nonsense than they do actually just preaching the pure, unadulterated gospel. And that's the problem, the continual propagating of lies. If Black Lives Matter, then why aren't we defending the fact that there are more black babies that are being aborted than there are that are born? If Black Lives Matter, why aren't we working our rears off to get fathers in those households? 81%, it's as high as 81% of the households in black families do not have fathers in there. Why are we not speaking out against that? Why is it that we spent so much time formulating documentation online that speaks about our policy with respect to systemic racism in the church, using Marxist tactics like, hey, sign if you agree here. If you agree, sign right here. Those are Marxist tactics. Let's go ahead and do that. Yet, not a single person, not a single one of those people are spending time writing the same kind of document about their blatant opposition towards abortion or their blatant opposition towards the other things that are going on. Guys, this is completely out of control.
Yeah.
It's absolutely crazy. Why aren't we doing things? If Black lives really mattered, why aren't we having enough integrity to tell the truth?
Yeah.
Why, instead of wanting to be popular, get some people to like you on social media just so that you can live your legacy that's dying in the first place.
Yeah,
it's absolutely crazy. Pastors, listen, My legacy is not my legacy. There is no legacy here. It's Christ. It's Christ in me. I'm supposed to be a mirror that reflects him. If for whatever reason people start to notice the mirror is either dirty or broken. It's really simple. So we need to start reflecting the heart of God in these matters, because the heart of God in these matters is what really matters, not anything else.
Yep. It's the church has gotten so far away from righteousness and proclaiming Christ and the need for forgiveness. And I look at you look at so many things that are taking place that the church won't even talk about. One of them being abortion. Look, people can be forgiven for aborting their babies. I know that for a fact. That's what Christ does. He forgives. He forgives sinners, and anyone who sins, who's willing to come to him, he'll forgive them. But the church won't even deal with those things. And the church, and then you buy into the 1619 project, which we don't have time to get into today, but I will with Charlie Kirk on Sunday afternoon at Hope for Our Times YouTube. And also, James, I'm assuming one of your 3 services you have, Matt, you'll be getting into that too. So the 1619 project, a lot of our viewers probably don't know what that is yet, but you will be well informed come Sunday when you watch these programs with Charlie Kirk. I want to go on to another thing, because we're watching all these different things culminate, not just wars and rumors of wars and hurricanes that are taking place, pestilences, as we know, immorality. Think of this, famine. Here's this. World Food Program requests $5 billion in emergency funds to prevent, get this, famine of biblical proportions. That's their words, not mine. And then we have the derecho storm that devastated Iowa and much of the production of corn in the United States. We have locusts that have devastated much of Africa. And then we have China, which is on the verge of mass starvation. And yet Jesus said one of the signs would be famines. And what do we have? Famines escalating like birth pains upon a pregnant woman, as the Bible said they would in the last days. This is just another sign that we are so close to what is coming. James, what do you know about this, especially with China? When you look at that, I've read that China is now looking in desperation for the U.S. to export their farm products to China, but yet we've been hit by the derecho storm. And you look, what do you make of these things?
So this is so interesting, right? I actually think that this does go to many of the prophetic signs that you've been talking about, right? You know, a lot of the things we read about in Matthew 24 and so on and so such. I'm totally with you on that. But here's something else that just rings in my mind, and it becomes even more interesting. You and I both agree on the fact that China isn't mentioned in Bible prophecy, right?
Yeah.
Well, think about this. They're already in a crisis with health. They're in a crisis with food. They're beginning to face an energy crisis, right? And then now they're beginning to talk about a population crisis, which they created, by the way, by the amount of abortions that they have in their country, and they're just absolutely satanic forms of birth control that they use. It's dark, the things that they do. I wouldn't even call it birth control. I would just say murder. But what's so interesting is they've done this to themselves, the Chinese Communist Party. And what's even more interesting is the fact that they are well on their way to flying the airplane into the ground. It's inconsequential. This is why I think for me and you have been screaming this for years. There is no Chinese 200 million man army. I mean,
right. Let me ask, let's talk about that for a minute. All right. I didn't even know we were going to go there, because every time we mention it, and Don Stewart mentioned it with me not too long ago too, but we've been saying this for a long time. Listen, in the whole 200 million man army is not, the Chinese army is not in the Bible, yet it's been taught out there for decades now, and all kinds of people that watch you and watch me and watch this program right now are shocked and appalled that we would say such a thing, as if we're heretics. Listen, China is not is not the big player in the last days, and neither is America. And you can't connect a 200 million army with Chinese invasion at Armageddon, can you?
No, not even close. It doesn't make sense geopolitically. It doesn't even make sense with the human resources unless we all of a sudden become superhumans that don't need any logistics. We don't need food. We don't need shelter. We don't need to poop. Forgive me for saying that, right? We don't need to do any of that stuff. And we're just superhumans that can just run without interruption. You can't even get a 200,000 man army.
No, you can't.
In that scenario as you're fighting that. Not to mention the fact that the most gravest error that gets made with people who teach through the book of Revelation is this: they don't take it literally.
Yeah.
And that's the huge problem.
Yeah.
You don't take it literally. You create the problems that are created. And don't get me wrong. There are linguistic cues that, are provided for us in Revelation that show us where things might be somewhat metaphorical. Like, for example, when Jesus says you're neither hot nor cold, but you're lukewarm, I'll spew you out of my mouth. Well, clearly, Jesus isn't going to suck up a Christian or suck up a church. So there's a metaphorical use that's being projected there that we can obviously come to. But when we talk about descriptions of creatures, and when we talk about things that he sees in the sky, and the bowl judgments that we see in Revelation 16, where water is turning into blood, a third of the water is turning into blood, and all the other things that are going on, why don't we take those things literally? A lot of people say, oh no, it's lava from a volcano. I heard that recently about one of the bowl judgments with respect to the water turning into blood. Mm-hmm. Some kook out there basically said, oh, it's a lava that comes out of a volcano, and that's what we see. It's not really blood. It's John didn't know what he was looking at. What?
Yeah.
What are we talking about, people? We're making a huge mistake here.
Yeah.
Take it literally. These are supernatural creatures.
Yeah. In fact, even in the book of Revelation, you'll see a word like or as if. And so that gives you an indication right there. Okay, it's an illustration at that point. So here's the problem, James, is teachers have done this. They'll say they go literally through the Bible. They'll say there's 3 sets of judgments: the seal judgments, the trumpet judgments, and then the bowl judgments, 7 judgments each. But somehow when it comes to Revelation chapter 9, the trumpet judgments, Revelation chapter 16, the bowl judgments, suddenly they take the one judgment and they connect it, the 200 million demons, they connect it somehow from chapter 9 and the trumpet judgments with the judgment in Revelation chapter 16 of the judgment of Armageddon, when the army of the east comes over the dried up Euphrates River.
It's crazy.
2 separate judgments. And it's just, the army of the east doesn't mean China. It just means east of the Euphrates River. That's all it means. So Bible teachers for years have taken it completely out of context, and they've left all of their way of discerning what the Bible is actually teaching in the book of Revelation. And suddenly, when it comes to those 2 particular judgments, they throw all that logic out and they throw them together and they come up with a 200 million man army. And it's been taught out there for so many years that people just believe it, and the Bible doesn't teach it.
Well, and with respect to, and this is an excellent point you brought up, with respect to the conflation of these different judgments that are brought up in different chapters, people don't think this through all the time, right? And that's why I think it's incumbent upon us to point these subtleties out. But one of the things that we should be pointing out on a regular basis is there's a reason why God created the transitional infrastructure from the different types of judgments in Revelation. He did that to make it very, very clear to us that we're talking about different instances in different situations. And if you notice it, look at the transition that takes place when you go from one type of judgment to the other. That first judgment out from the past is always like a transitional motion, and you can see it. It's a very clear transition that takes place. So the whole idea is so that we, as the reader, do not make the mistake of conflating the different types of judgments and saying, hey, yeah, this is this, and oh, they're the same thing, and putting them, that's where all the confusion goes. And it's so crazy, especially when we have key verses in Revelation that make things very, very clear to us. It really shows us that these things are true. They really, truly are apocalyptic, meaning they're revealed to us. We know it. It's not a question. And Revelation is not as confusing as everybody says it is. Mm-hmm. The reason why it is because of the teaching that we're seeing right now. That's exactly what's causing that, Tommy.
When people try to make it too symbolic, it causes all kinds of confusion. Then they say it's not, you can't even trust this. It's just spiritualize the whole thing, and they get it all mixed up. And don't do that. You just take it for what it says, and you'll do exceptionally well with the book of Revelation. In fact, the book of Revelation is the only book in the Bible that promises a blessing to those who read, hear, and keep the words. And by the way, I believe the enemy doesn't want us to read the book of Revelation. You know why, James? Two main reasons. One is it's the glory of Jesus Christ, the revealing of him, the glory past, the glory present, and when he returns, the glory future. And the other problem is it also reveals to us the end of Satan when he's cast into the lake of fire forever and ever. Satan doesn't want anybody to know that that's the way it's going to go, but God promises a blessing to those who do read, hear, and study the words.
Well, and that's the thing. We gain so much confidence by understanding what the Bible is actually telling us. And it's so funny because there's a lot of people that will argue, hey, well, I'm a little confused with respect to the tribulation. I'm a little...
It's my timer. Okay, it's my timer. Finish that thought real quick. I want to ask you one more thing. So go for it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people that say, I'm confused with respect to the tribulation. Is God going to come for the church before that? When is the rapture going to take place? All of these things, when in reality, every single thing that's laid out for us in Scripture makes it extraordinarily clear. Yeah. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 makes it clear, gives us a good timeline of when things are going to happen. We don't have to confuse things. When we read about the 70th week of Daniel, we get a really clear timeline. When we later on push into the end of Daniel, we get clear timelines being given to us. We even get a key to the series of timelines that take place in the book of Revelation in verse 19 of chapter 1. There's no confusion. And if we'll just study it, look at it for face value, even Jesus in Matthew chapter 24, in part of the Olivet Discourse, breaks things up very clearly for us. He shows us what's happening didactically, and he shows us what's going to be prophetic. And it's remarkable. It's very easy if you will take it literally at face value.
Yep. Amen. It's much easier to understand than people make it out to be, because they're told by those who have gone to schools to teach these things that you can't understand it.
That's right.
And the Catholic Church did that for centuries and put everything in Latin. No wonder why you couldn't understand anything. Hey, listen, one last question. I know we're out of time. It's been a great program with you today. Maybe next time we get further into the peace deal between the UAE and Israel, but I want to throw this out to you right now regarding that. So you go back a generation, Turkey and Iran were friends with Israel.
That's right.
The UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan they were enemies. In fact, they were attacking Israel if you go back. But the Bible predicted something else, didn't it?
Yeah, of course the Bible predicted that. You go to Ezekiel chapter 38, 39, it's interesting. You read something completely different than the narrative that existed roughly 10 to 15 years ago. Ezekiel 38, 39 tells us that there will be certain nations that will attack Israel. We know who those nations are, right? We've got Turkey, we've got Russia, we've got Iran, we've got Libya, we've got the Sudan, and then there's a small conglomeration of nations that are not mentioned that exist there that are going to be coming against it. Libya, by the way, is really interesting, especially with the civil war that's going on. I think the Bible seemed to insinuate that we would see that kind of instability indicative of the circumstances that would lead to this attack. What do I mean when I say that? Well, the whole reason for the attack is going to be to plunder the riches of Israel. And if you notice, just Libya, just like Russia is beginning to deal with, and all these other places, they are beginning to lack natural resources that Israel has an abundance of, and oil being one of the big things. But here's the thing that's so spectacular about all of this, right? There are nations that are not mentioned in this battle, right? So we don't hear Egypt, which is crazy when you think about it, because Egypt was like the number one enemy until 1979, okay? And then Jordan was a pretty good enemy of Israel as well until 1994. Those are the two peace treaties that ended up taking place, and you can fact check me. I'm off the top of my head, I'm thinking that's when those treaties take place. But then what's even more interesting than that, and what's even cooler than that, is we've got those peace treaties that seem to be pretty wired, pretty solid, pretty good. It doesn't seem like there are any more issues. But what's interesting is everybody said, well, you know what? there's no way in the world that Saudi Arabia is ever going to be friendly towards Israel, except for the fact that Saudi Arabia and the Gulf regions around Saudi Arabia is specifically mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39 to object. Now, they're not going to get involved in the battle because God's going to defend Israel. But what's interesting is they are going to specifically object. And it's very unique because this UAE deal, look, let me just say this. Mohammed bin Zayed, there's no way, Sheikh Mohammed, there's no way in the world he would have gone forth with this deal had the royal family in Saudi Arabia not approved it. Okay, let me just tell you that right now. Okay, and this is very economically based. Not to mention, well, there's some other things, especially with diplomatic relationships starting up in those countries and so on and so forth, and actually being made official. There's some really unique nuances there, and we don't have the time to talk about that. But what's incredible is the result that Saudi Arabia is hoping for in this, and the UAE, is going to happen. And I'll tell you what the result is. They are ticking off Iran, and that's exactly what they want to do. They want to get into Iran's head. That's exactly the way it works. Iran is mad. They're mad at the United States of America. They're mad now at the UAE. They're mad at Saudi Arabia, but that doesn't surprise me. Why? Because those guys are the Sunnis, right? And Iran, they're the Shiites. And, you're talking about 95% of the Muslims are the Sunnis, yet they're the ones we don't want to really, they're the ones we don't need to really worry about in the last days. The ones we're going to worry about in the last days, Iran, the Shiites, the minorities. And the Bible made all of that clear. We're beginning to see the political infrastructure that supports that. You can't make this stuff up, bro.
The whole thing, all the nations have completely flipped their places to fit exactly where they needed to. Completely changed. Got put them right Turkey. There. And Turkey, listen, I wanted to talk to you about Turkey. We don't have enough time today. I want to talk to you about the gas find that they have in the Black Sea. Oh. What is going on up there? There's so many. I tell you what, next week, let's talk about the peace plan, and let's talk about these issues, because they are big and they point to a very soon return of the Lord Jesus Christ. With that, James, we are out of time. Thank you. It was great time with you today. Both of us are looking forward to Charlie Kirk this Sunday. The morning at your church, the afternoon at ours. Ours is sold out, but you can watch it online. James, if people want to go to your church, where do they go?
So Calvary Chapel Signal Hill, we are 1200 East 29th Street in the city of Signal Hill. We are not selling tickets. It's first come, first serve. So make sure you're here early. We've got our 8 o'clock, our 9:45, and 11:30. And I feel like a fool. I think we probably should have, just to keep chaos from happening. Yeah. It's probably a little crazy, but we do have a big overflow set up outside, and it's going to be really, really great. And we are going to be live streaming all of them. Yeah.
So you could, yours is Sunday morning. When I have something Sunday morning, I don't sell tickets. It's just the way it is. You end up with overflow. But ours is Sunday afternoon, 4 o'clock. It will be live on this YouTube channel, live on my Facebook.
You have to, Tom. You have to, because if you didn't, that place, it would be crazy.
Look, we had at least 500 requests on Monday alone after the event was sold out. They're free tickets, but afterwards, 500 just on Monday alone for what's coming this Sunday. So we know we're going to get a lot of people are just going to show up, but so we have overflow set up for people who do. But nevertheless, we'll be live on this YouTube channel, live on Facebook. You can catch James also on his Instagram and his YouTube and Facebook. James, what's your Instagram again?
My Instagram is James Cadiz. We have 2 YouTube channels. Tom and I have one together, and that's Real Hope with Tom and James. But the Charlie Kirk shows that we're going to be doing together, or the Charlie Kirk services that we're going to be doing together, will be on the Calvary Chapel Signal Hill YouTube page. Please subscribe. We'll notify you as soon as we go on live. Do that for Hope for Our Times. If you don't subscribe to Hope for Our Times, you're not going to get notification when we go live. And it's important that you do that, guys. And then remember, subscribing to these things really does help us. It helps us get the word out, helps us do more. And I'm very thankful, by the way, for your support. We have doubled our subscription in the last, I would probably say, month and a half, which is a blessing. We've only been at it, at least for Calvary Chapel Signal Hill, for the last few months. But we want to thank you for that. I know Tom is very grateful for all of you that are subscribing. Please, for those of you that are watching this on Hope for Our Times, please take a moment to just hit the subscribe button, because it really does help. It expands the listening audience. It's really important. I would appreciate it if you did that with Calvary Chapel Signal Hill and James Cadiz on Instagram or James Cadiz on Facebook.
Amen. Thank you very much, James. It was great with you today. I can't wait till next week. Of course, I'll see you Sunday also with Charlie Kirk.
I'll see you then.
All right.
Yep.
God bless you, James.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Love you, bro. God bless you guys.